All right, gang, let's get started. Good morning, good morning. Russ, again, thank you for playing the music as we do that. That makes it a much different experience. So thank you. You know, when times are tough, I think it's important that we maintain some levity. And I know that, you know, things are certainly challenging right now, but I came across a fun joke that I wanted to share with you. So there was a coffee chain that opened up a new store, and the chairman of the board always had this habit or this rule that he would go out and make a surprise visit. Nobody knew, of course, who he was as the chairman of the board, the employees at any of the thousands of stores that they had across the globe. But he would show up randomly at these stores, and he showed up one morning at the newest store that they had, and to his surprise, there was nobody behind the counter, and there should have been. That time of the day in the morning, the counter should never be unmanned. And so he obviously was very irritated. He went to the back of the store, nobody back there in the prep kitchen. So he went all the way back to the back door of the building and noticed that there were two people that he discovered to be, number one, the manager, and number two, to be the counter help. And he read them the riot act. I mean, he was ticked for obvious reasons. The store was supposed to be open and nobody was there to help customers. There were customers there. And so he read them with the riot act, and the manager looked at him like, well, who do you think you are? And in fact, the manager said that. He said, well, just who do you think you are? And the chairman of the board said, well, I am the chairman of a board of this company, of the entire company, of the thousands of stores that this company owns. I am the chairman. I am the guy. He said, so what do you think about that? Well, the manager responded and said, well, now that I know that, what do I think about that? I think that neither you nor I are going to go any higher in this company. So I thought that was funny. Zig Ziglar shared that with me the other morning when I was listening. So I thought you'd find that funny. So look, guys and gals, I've got three primary points that I want to share with you this morning, but I'm going to share these points with you with some stories, some of my favorite stories. I always like sharing stories to help exemplify the principles. So let me, first of all, if you're taking notes, the first thing that I want to talk about is, you know, defining moments. What we're going to find in life is that life will present to us opportunities that really are defining moments. Those, and we've all been there, those moments in life where we have the opportunity to go left or right or straight ahead. There are so many different pathways that we can take, but something happens that makes it clear that we have choices. And sometimes we have to choose. It's not as if, you know, we're going along and we decide, well, I just want to go a different direction. No, something happens, and as a result of that, we're forced into a choice. The good news is that we always have a choice. Even though it seems like we don't have a choice based upon what we have experienced in the past, or maybe based upon what we see the future to be, the truth is we always have a choice. The question is, what will we choose? And those are really our defining moments. And if you go back in your life and think about it, whether in recent history or from your earliest memories, you can identify those defining moments. We all can. Those moments where it was very pivotal, the decision that we took and the direction that we went, and the impact that that had on our life. And I think right now, given what's going on in today's world, and specifically what's happening in our industry, real estate and those ancillary services, any of the industries that are supported by or support real estate, that we're all in an opportunity to have a defining moment. And I say opportunity because it really is. It's a time to redirect. It's a time to get maybe on a different path, a more positive path, or could be to confirm what it is that we're doing and double down on that particular path. So it reminds me of this story, and I want to share this story with you because it's one that's very near and dear to me. It's about a little boy named Jackie, and Jackie came from a home that was very abusive. Abusive not only through neglect, just simply parents who did not pay attention, who would leave the kids at home for extended periods of time and letting them fend for themselves at very young ages, but also very overt abuse such as physical, chaining Jackie to a pole in the basement and putting food and water down there in dishes like you would treat a dog. That at the dinner table, if the kids didn't like what was served, specifically Jackie, at times a fork would be jammed into his hand on the table. I mean, some very severe abuse. And as you might imagine, a little boy treated that way will end up having challenges in that home and want to escape and end up acting out, which Jackie did. At a very young age, he started to do things that no parent would want their young child to do, stealing from people and bullying and those sorts of things. In fact, at the age of 11, Jackie ended up in foster care, and ultimately, at the age of 13, ended up in a detention center for youth as a result of getting in trouble over and over again. And after years of living that way, engaging in theft, car theft, theft of stores after hours, going in and stealing things out of the store, this young man at the age of 19 ended up in prison. In fact, ended up in the Utah State Penitentiary. And he spent 3 years there. And if you know anything about the prison system, most of us don't know firsthand, fortunately. None of us, I don't think, do. But we know enough that it's not a cool place to spend our time. And it's full of some pretty bad people. People that went simply beyond theft to murder and other horrible things. Well, Jackie found himself in an environment with people like that, some very hardened criminals, some very rough people. And he was there for 3 years. And after 3 years was able to get out, and of course found himself obviously getting out of prison after 3 years in one of those defining moments. He could choose to try to rebuild and change his ways, or he could go back to what he was doing before that put him right where he was in those 3 years in the penitentiary. He started to associate again with the friends that he knew, because that's what was comfortable, and he looked to them for support. And unfortunately, those friends were still engaging in the things that ended up putting Jackie, or now Jack, into prison. But in the process of being with those friends, through a mutual friend of a mutual friend, he met a young lady by the name of Mary. And those two started dating. And very quickly, they realized that they were compatible, and that in fact, at least Jack thought that he loved Mary. So they moved in together. And they moved into an apartment in Salt Lake City, Utah, and were there for a few months. And one late night, early morning, Jack came running into the apartment that he and Mary shared. And under his right arm, he had an amplifier, like a music amplifier. And over his left shoulder, he had a guitar that was slung with the strap. And he looked like, if you've seen any of those classic pictures of a football player with his head down, shoulders forward, holding that football, that's the way he looked when he came through that door and started to run up the stairs in the apartment. And as he did that, of course, he surprised Mary, who was still up, wondering where he was. And he yelled to her, "When the cops get here, tell them that I have been asleep. I've been in bed all night." Well, she was confused by all of this, didn't know what was going on. Well, within a matter of just a few minutes, there was a large, loud pounding and knock on the door, and she heard these voices. And as she got closer, she heard police open up. So she opened up the door, and of course they came in asking to talk to Jack. And they asked, "Where is he?" And she said, "Well, he's up in bed asleep." And they said, "Take us up to where he is." So she, of course, complied, took them up to where he was asleep, supposedly. And they roused him from bed and said to him, "We know that it was you, and we're going to find it." And he looked at him and said, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been in bed asleep all night." And so one officer stayed with Jack, and a couple of other officers searched the apartment. And I don't know if today they get away with that, but back then they did. They for whatever reason, they felt like they had probable cause, and they searched the home. Well, after several minutes of searching the home, they couldn't find what they were looking for. So they all three gathered back around Jack, and they gave him this promise. They said, "We do not know where you put it, but we're going to find it. And when we do, you're going back to prison," because they knew him. I mean, he had a rap sheet that was really long. He had a reputation. And the cops left, much to Jack's surprise and relief. He was very relieved that they left and he was not arrested. And at that point, he thought things were about to get better. Well, what he didn't realize is that they were not about to get better, because he hadn't seen the wrath of Mary yet. Mary very quickly made it clear that she was not impressed with what he was doing and with that behavior, and bringing that into her home. And she said to him, "Look, you've got a choice right now." And this was his defining moment. "You have a choice, Jack. You can either continue to live this way and doing these things that had you in prison for 3 years, or you can choose to be with me and start a family, but you can't do both." Those were her words to him. And she looked at him and she said, "So my question for you is, what are you going to do?" And he paused, dumbfounded, first of all, that she was going to confront him. Now, as he got to know her, he was never surprised by that, because that's who she was. But he looked at her, and he walked away, and he started to pack up his things. And at this point, Mary didn't know what he was doing. He started to pack up his things in his pickup, and also started to pack up her things. And by the time the morning was done, everything was packed into the truck, and the two of them in Jack's pickup truck traveled about 150 miles away from Salt Lake City and started a new life. And it was a year later. You know, I've told that story. I'm sorry. I've told that story so many times, and every time I tell it, I do this. The emotion is there, obviously, because that's my dad. And the fact that he chose to go that direction is obviously very important, because if he hadn't, I wouldn't be here. So if you were here and I could see all of your faces, I'd ask you to tell me not to do this, but I can't do that. So I'm having a hard time collecting myself. But thank you for letting me share that story with you. Now, look, none of us are getting out of prison or about to go into prison. That's not our defining moment. But I think that my dad's story is an important one. Here's what you need to know about my dad. That guy that I described, well, that kid, and then that young man that I described is not the guy that I know. I didn't really know any of that until I was in my late teens and early 20s. And it really wasn't until about, I guess, 8 years ago that I sat down with my dad and asked him about that. And I didn't know much about it, but he shared everything with me. And I was so grateful, because the guy that I know today and have known all of my life was not that guy. The concept of honesty and hard work and commitment, all of that I learned from him. And so it's interesting that they can change. We can be in those defining moments and choose to go a dramatically different direction. And at the time, may not seem like it, may seem scary. It's brand new. Never done this before. Don't know what I'm going to do. Don't know how I'm going to handle it. And yet, going that direction will make all the difference in terms of our experience and ultimately the life that we live and really who we are as an individual. You know, my dad worked for over 30 years as a pipe fitter welder in the union, and hardest working person I've ever known. He worked in Utah, Wyoming, Nevada, Montana, Hawaii, Arizona, California, and all of those places while the family remained in one spot, because the commitment was with him and my mom that the family would not be moved around, that he would move around. Man, I've never gotten so emotional over this story. I think that with what's going on right now, you know, it gives us an opportunity to find out what we're grateful for and to reflect on that. And I think that that's where we all are, the opportunity to reflect what we're grateful for and the sacrifices that others have made for us, our parents, grandparents, friends, family members, whomever they might be, and to recognize that we have a responsibility to them to, in these moments, these defining moments where things are difficult, to choose to do the difficult thing, to choose to do the hard thing. Which leads me to the second point, to ultimately to choose a path that leads someplace challenging. You know, it would have been so much easier for my dad to go back to the old way, because that's what he knew. He'd known that since he was a very young child, and being in trouble. That, as much as to us it might be a shock and it might be like crazy and we would never do that, that was his life. That's who he was. Just as who you are today or I am today, and as comfortable as we are with that, that's what he was comfortable with. And yet he took that very difficult decision. So what I would say to you and to all of us, to remind us all, we have to choose a path that leads someplace challenging. And see, most people won't do that. They'll avoid that path. They'll continue to do what they've always done, even if it's not going to get them ultimately what they say that they want, or that it will lead to all sorts of difficulty and pain. I mean, it was not easy for my dad being in prison for 3 years. He shared with me the stories, some very scary stories, very scary. There's a reason. Most of you have not seen this photo. And if this were in person, I would show you a photo of my dad. When he went in, he was this skinny, lanky, blonde-headed, weighed nothing kid, basically. And when he came out of prison, he looked like a monster. I mean, the guy it didn't look like he had a neck. His shoulders went to his ears, and this chest and arms, because that's what he had to do in prison to survive. You know, we do what we have to do to simply survive, but the extraordinary person will choose a path that is more difficult and will choose to do something that they're not familiar with, because they know that in those moments, in being that person, being disciplined to change what it is that we do, that we become who it is that we say we are or want to be. So critical. You know, choose a challenging path. I was having a conversation with my daughter, Caroline, about 4 or 5 years ago. I had come home and my former wife, Kay, had said to me, she said, you need to talk with Caroline because Caroline is considering quitting the cello. Now, I mean, kids do this. Kids will get into a sport or want to play an instrument and do it for a year or two and decide that they don't want to do that. That's very normal. I mean, I did it. I played the trumpet for a few years and stopped playing it, and all other things, the kids do. But there was something about Caroline that she's just exceptional at it. She's very good at it. And she was all into it. I mean, it was like the cello was Caroline and Caroline was the cello. She played beautifully. And I was really disappointed personally because I wanted her to be able to share that gift with people. People meaning me. I just loved asking her. I would come home and say, Caroline, would you play me a song? And I would just sit down with her in the living room and she would play me a song. I loved it. And if I say this to you, most of you who know me are going to say, well, duh, it doesn't surprise me. But without exception, when I would sit there and she would play the cello for me, I would end up, with tears rolling down my eyes because I was so proud of the skill that she'd learned, that it really had become a gift that she could share with other people. And there I was sitting with Caroline, and she told me, she said, yeah, I want to quit playing the cello. I said, really? Why? She said, well, I want to play the guitar. And I said, you want to play the guitar? What's that about? She said, I'm just tired of playing the cello. It's just all the practice and everything. I'm just not enjoying it. I said, really? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, let me ask you, do you know how to play the guitar at all? And she said, no, but I play a string instrument, so that there should be somewhat of an easy transition. I said, but you don't know how to play it. You're going to have to practice. And she said, oh yeah, I'll have to practice. I said, do you think you'll have to practice a lot? She said, well, I guess. I said, well, let me ask you this question. Do you want to become good at it? And she said, yes. I said, so if you want to become good at it, do you think you have to practice a lot? And she said, yeah. And she paused when she said that. And I knew that the light bulb started to go off. And I said, Caroline, I don't care if you play the cello or the guitar, ultimately. Ultimately, what I care about is whether you decide to stick with something or to quit. She was at a defining moment where she could choose to take a difficult path, because what she had found that in her process of learning to play the cello, that it was starting to get more difficult at this point, because we had hired for her a coach who was the first chair of the Utah Symphony, and she is not an easy coach. And she was finding that it was difficult to every week, this expectation, this bar was set, and that she had to perform to that bar, and she had to practice to that level. And she wasn't liking that, and then she started to resist it, like, I don't want this. And yet, in having that conversation with her, she realized, because Caroline is somebody, when she does something, she wants to do it exceptionally well. She's not just going to half do it. She's got to be exceptional at it. And she realized that if she was going to start playing the cello, that it was going to be the same sort of commitment. And the cool thing is this, that she ultimately decided to stick with the cello. And her mom and I had the privilege to, a couple of years ago, invest, and I say invest because it really was, it was an investment. I mean, we had to take out a loan for it. We invested in a cello that cost $13,000. And I say that not to brag, because it blows my mind to this day that we still did that. But it was because I saw in this young lady such ability, and more so this commitment. I think about, the way I was in school, and I eventually got good at school. In the beginning, in junior high, I was horrible at it, flunked out of English, ended up, almost having to take English over, but for the fact that my English teacher saw and gave me pity and changed all of my F's to a D, and I didn't have to repeat ninth grade, or at least ninth grade English. But Caroline, the work ethic and the commitment that she has, getting up at 5 a.m. and I mean literally not finishing her days until 11 o'clock at night, with all the things that she's been involved in, from theater and voice and her cello practice, but then being in two orchestras, the school orchestra as well as another youth orchestra in the state of Utah. Well, the cool thing is this, that just last week, Caroline, actually it was 2 weeks ago, Caroline got a notice from the University of Utah that she's receiving a full ride scholarship in their theater and performing arts program. And I share that with you, maybe as a parent to brag, but more importantly, to share with you the importance of taking that challenging route. And that I know that moment that Caroline chose to double down and focus on the cello and becoming exceptional at it, that it was going to lead to good places for her, as it has. And I am absolutely proud of her for doing that. Look, ladies and gentlemen, quitting can be a habit just as much as winning. And it is so important that we recognize that. And that as things are difficult, as they are right now, we have a choice to take the challenging path, meaning to work on ourselves. I don't know if you were part of the virtual, the Zoomcast, the summit yesterday, but what a great event to listen to Paige and Sharon as George interviewed them. But to really, to see things the way that they are, not worse than they are, not better than they are, but to see things as they are, and things right now are difficult. But in these moments, to choose to do the difficult things, to stick to a schedule, to work on your physical health, to work on your relationships, to work on your business, and doing the things that we have to do to ultimately live the life that we say that we want. The third thing that I want to share with you is this, and then we'll wrap it up. You know, right now we're all feeling a lot of resistance, and I think more so right now than is often the case, so much of that resistance is so external, it feels at least, and that we feel like so much is out of our control. And yet really the truth is not so much, not any more today than any time before. I get the fact, as Paige and Sharon said yesterday, that we've never experienced what we're experiencing before in terms of a pandemic, so we don't know how to respond. That is all true. But what we do know how to respond to is difficulty. What we do know how to respond to is resistance, because that's not new to us. It's not new to any of us. We've all experienced it from the moment that we had to take our first breath when we were birthed. So my statement is that when resistance is greatest, that's when there is an opportunity for growth and the breakthrough. I want you to remember that. Right now, we are basically training and working for that breakthrough. And here's the promise to you. And this is a simple one, and it's a kind of a duh promise, but it is a promise. We are closer to the end today than we were 6 weeks ago. In fact, we're closer to the end today than we were yesterday. Now, we don't all know exactly when that end is in terms of the mandates, to stay safe or stay at home. But what we know is that we are certainly closer to that end, and that things will get easier. But until such time, don't choose to make things easier now. Choose to do the hard things so that when that resistance goes away, that you get better results. Let me just share this story with you, and we'll finish on this. Chuck Yeager. Some of you may know that name. Chuck Yeager is famous for many things, but the primary thing is that Chuck Yeager was known as a phenomenal fighter pilot in World War II, and eventually a test pilot for all of the test planes, the rocket planes, really, after the World War II. And he was the man who set the record for being the first man in history to break the sound barrier. In the Mojave Desert in 1947, in October, Chuck Yeager found himself in this test plane called the X-1, and it really wasn't a plane, it was a rocket. I say it was a rocket because its wings were very small, and it had basically a jet engine, and it looked very much like a rocket. And it really didn't fly like a normal plane, didn't take off and land like a normal plane. Chuck Yeager was on the tarmac to take off, and did not tell anybody that a couple of days before he'd fallen off his horse and broken some ribs, and he was all taped up, and he had to use a stick clandestinely to close the canopy on the plane because he couldn't reach up because of the pain caused by the broken ribs. The man was not in a condition that his superiors would have let him fly this rocket ship had they known. And yet he chose to be in that cockpit that morning in October in the Mojave Desert because he was committed to working to try to break the sound barrier in this experimental plane. Well, as he took off, he had radio connection with control. And for some time they could see him. But at one point, obviously, they lost eye contact with him, but they had radio contact. And as he increased his speed, he would give his speed to radio and say, 751, 752, 753. And as he got going faster and faster, the radio connection started to become less strong. It started to fade and started to crackle. until at one point they heard him 756, and then all radio contact broke off. Well, in that process, as he was increasing his speed, this rocket ship that he was in began to shake violently. Violently. In fact, he believed that it was going to disintegrate, that it was on the verge of absolutely just simply exploding, disintegrating as he was going through the air in that high rate of speed. And Chuck Yeager was at this moment, this defining moment where he could choose to throttle back and let the resistance win, or he could throttle forward and power through that resistance, because that's really what the sound barrier is. That's the resistance. When you take an object going that fast through space, all of the air, all of the matter that plane has to go through, that resistance creates a lot of stress that can devour a plane and can kill a man, can kill a human. He had a choice. And in that moment, Chuck Yeager decided to throttle forward. And that's when he lost contact with ground control. They assumed at ground control that the plane, they had hoped not, but they had assumed that the plane had disintegrated and that Chuck Yeager had lost his life. But within just a matter of a fraction of a second or two, they heard Chuck Yeager's voice and they heard a loud boom. Chuck Yeager had broken the sound barrier on that day in October. He was able to do that because, ladies and gentlemen, he chose to throttle forward. In times of resistance, we can choose to pull back, to decide not to get in the cockpit, to decide to avoid the difficult things and hope things will pass, or we can simply double down and put that throttle all the way to the wall. It's a choice. So I'm going to leave you with 4 questions. I want you to think about these 4 questions in light of these 3 principles that we've talked about: the defining moments, and then choosing a path that leads someplace challenging, and that when you're in that challenge and the resistance is great, that you choose to throttle through, not pull back. But keeping in mind those 3 principles and these stories that I've shared with you, I want you to ask yourself these 4 questions. I'm going to leave you with these questions. Ponder these questions today and moving forward. Number 1, what do I want? Ask yourself that question. What do I want? And it could be broadly speaking about your life, about your relationships, about your health, about life. It could be about your business. What do you want? Get clear about those things. And then the second question would be this: what would it take to get it? See, it's so important that we know what we want, but it's equally important to understand, well, what would it take in order to get it? Who would I have to be, and what will I have to do to get those things, to become that person? And then the third question is, how will I have to change in order to get it? And I just notice what I just said. How will I have to change? See, it's not how will the market have to change? How will the economy have to change? How will the world have to change? How will I have to change? Because those who ultimately succeed never wait for the world to change. They change the world. Let me repeat that. Those who ultimately succeed don't wait for the world to change. They change the world. The history books are not replete with people who waited for history to change. They made history. They didn't wait for the world to change. They changed the world. You name them: the Lincolns, the Washingtons, the Mother Teresas, the Kennedys, the Lincolns, all of them, they did not wait. The Martin Luther Kings, the Wright brothers, they did not wait for the world to change. They changed the world by changing themselves. Change yourself. And then the last question is, why do I want it? As important it is that you know what you want, you better discover why it is that you want it. Because here's the deal. It is going to require a very high price from you to get what it is that you want. Very high price. And you're going to have to be willing to pay that price. And if you don't understand why you want it at a deep emotional level, you won't pay the price. And what you'll do, because this is what the average person will do, they'll go back to behaving the way they always did. The way Jack had the opportunity when he was 21 years old. So you can choose to take the path in that defining moment. that offers the least amount of resistance, or choose the path that offers the greatest amount. And when you face that resistance, that you power forward. So I hope that this conversation has been an impactful one for you this morning. I enjoy sharing those stories and those principles with you. One, because it's good for me to remind myself of these principles, but also I enjoy sharing these because I believe that they'll have a great impact on you if you will let them. So having said that, let's finish this up with some closing affirmations. Great job on being here today and participating in this, and have a fantastic day. And we'll talk to you next time. So let's finish it up with some